In the far reaches of the Pacific Northwest, where the coastline fractures into the mist and the forests close in like living walls, there are stories older than any map. Tonight, we are exploring one of those stories here in the Ominous Archives. Alright guys, so if you're new here, or if you just want a reminder from a whopping week ago, I'm Nick.
And I'm Em.
And we are the hosts of the Ominous Archives. Tonight, we're going to be talking about a being that stalks the border between the natural and supernatural. It's a creature feared, respected, and some say still encountered today. This is the tale of the Kushtaka. But before we dive into that, second week of second season, hanging in there. We've big things in store. I don't think we got into it in episode 1. They're in the works. They're taking time. We are literally doing majority of this all alone, figuring things out as we go. So we hit a lot of roadblocks, but there are big things in store. You got anything you want to add, Em? Anything new, exciting from the holidays or the new year? Or...
I truly wish I could give you something of substance, but really, I've got nothing.
No?
I really got nothing.
Has upgraded. She moved from a laptop to a tablet.
There you go. There, I did. I also got a new phone, finally.
Yeah?
So that's nice. It is really nice, actually, to be working from a tablet. I like it. It's a nice little handheld.
I'm going to have to try it, because this tablet, the computer reading is rough.
Yeah, I've got a nice little pencil. Pencil is a game changer. I love the pencil.
Yeah. Archie's still here. He's still crying. We now have a gate around the archives because the little one is up and walking. So the archives are now pretty much hers.
Yeah.
Except for when we record. But anyway, I guess we should dive in. It's about that time. So before we get too deep into the tale, it's important to pause and acknowledge where these legends come from and who they belong to. The Kushtaka is not simply a spooky creature passed around in a campfire tale or tourist brochures. It originates from living traditions from several indigenous peoples of the North Pacific coast, including the Tlingit, the Tsimshian, and the Tahltan. Again, we are doing our best with pronunciations. We even have them phonetically put it out, and I still don't think I get it right. But we're trying. These communities have lived in Southeast Alaska and the surrounding regions since long before written history. Their stories reflect relationships in the world that are far older than the towns or borders that we know of today. For many, the Kushtaka is not merely a monster, but a part of a cultural worldview where the boundaries between the human world and the spirit world are porous. These stories served and still serve as warnings, teachings, and expressions of wisdom about survival, respect, and the unseen forces of the landscape that can be both beautiful and unforgiving. Which to me, Alaska's unforgiving. Mm-hmm. Period. I would consider that person pretty badass if they're just going to move to Alaska. I feel I'm sure there's towns up there, I've never been there, so I'm sure there's towns where it's kind of, I'm not going to say city-like, but town-like, where it's okay. But for the most part, I just think it's so rugged up there.
Yeah, no, I couldn't do it. I don't know.
I don't know if I'd give it. I'd definitely have a vacation up there.
Oh, I would. I just don't know if I could live there. I would definitely go see it for sure.
Yeah. I don't think I could go up there and live either.
I just don't do well with extreme cold or extreme heat. I'm bad in extreme either.
Yeah, so Pennsylvania's perfect for you.
Right, I get both.
Laptop. So much of What non-native audiences know about the Kushtaka comes from written accounts recorded by outsiders, like prospectors, settlers, and early 20th century anthropologists. Those written versions preserve valuable information, but they also reflect the perspectives and biases of those people who collected them. As we explore these legends today, we do so with respect. We recognize that these stories are part of living cultures and that we are stepping into a tradition that's not our own. And the goal is not to sensationalize, but to appreciate the depth, the complexity, and the continuity of the people who have carried these stories for generations.
The Kushtaka, sometimes pronounced Kushtaka, comes from the folklore of the Tlingit and Tsimshian peoples of southeast Alaska and the Pacific Northwest coast. To understand the Kushtaka, you must step into a part of the world where glaciers, deep green forests, and various waterways shape the land. Southeast Alaska is a place carved from granite and ice, towering cliffs, endless forests, glacial rivers twisting through valleys, fog that rolls in so thick that you can feel it pressing against the skin. Simply cannot imagine that.
No.
Can't even.
It's a I think it's technically considered a rainforest.
Which is so crazy.
You don't think of it, right?
Right,
You think of like the Amazon.
Yeah. To the indigenous peoples of this region, the environment is alive, and not just metaphorically but literally. The world is filled with spirits, beings, and forces that coexist alongside humans. The one thing everyone agrees on is that the Kushtaka is most at home near water, streams, rivers, inlets, and the cold, gray ocean. The word itself, Kushtaka, in the context we're exploring today, is a simplified pronunciation of a Tlingit term that translates loosely into land-otter person. Quite literally.
I think it's crazy to think. And we'll post on the Instagram, but when you can see the pictures of this thing.
Yeah. The first time I literally saw the picture, I was like, oh, so that's an otter man.
Yeah, it's an otter man.
Literally.
Exactly what you think.
Lives up to the name. The being it describes is anything but simple. At its core, the Kushtaka is a shapeshifter, a creature capable of slipping between forms, most often appearing as a river otter, that stands nearly as tall as a human, but the transformation does not stop there. According to legend, it can also take the shape of humans, even mimicking their appearance or the voice of someone familiar. This ability is not just a trick, it's a lore.
Now, across many accounts, the Kushtaka uses familiarity as bait, appearing as a friend, a family member, or a figure in distress, especially a crying infant.
Oh, right, like perfect.
A wounded traveler, or even more insidiously, a loved one calling your name from a stretch of a dark shoreline. Those who follow these illusions often vanish into the landscape, never returning to tell their story. In certain parts of southeast Alaska, especially around the Thomas Bay, a place early prospectors ominously nicknamed Devil's Country, enter generations that have grown up hearing about people led into the wilderness by something that wasn't quite human. Some residents still refuse to enter the bay, believing that the area is profoundly haunted. Local stories speak of sudden disappearances, strange voices drifting through the fog, and shadows moving just beyond the tree line. Allegedly, a century-old landslide catastrophe in the region, which allegedly buried an entire village, is sometimes retold with a supernatural explanation. That the missing did not simply die, but became part of the Kushtaka themselves, because no bodies were ever found.
Which is so crazy to
right?
me.
I mean, it is a landslide, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But it depends on how many people get buried.
Oh, no,
but they did find...
That being the theory is crazy to me, I feel like.
Yes, that is crazy. Because I was like, well, then I guess the more you think about it, they did find everybody in Pompeii.
Right.
Not everybody, but they found people in Pompeii.
Right.
So, yet, the nature of the Kushtaka isn't entirely one-sided. Different clans, families, and storytellers describe them in strikingly different ways. In some traditions, the Kushtaka is a predator. They suggest a being whose intentions are as unpredictable as the Alaskan wilderness itself. One moment, it offers help. The next, it leads you astray. One version describes it as a guardian spirit. The others name it as the reason sailors drown and travelers go missing. Anthropologists documenting Tlingit and Tahltan stories in the early 1900s were struck by how widespread and how deeply believed these accounts were. In many of these stories, the Kushtaka was not simply a monster lurking in the forest's edges. It was a force woven into the spiritual fabric of daily life. To lose your way in the woods or along the coastline was a risk more than physical harm. It meant risking your soul. Today, along the inside passage of the Yucatan, down through Petersburg and beyond, modern-day fishermen, hunters, hikers, and residents still trade stories about uncanny encounters. Figures glimpsed along the shore, voices calling to them from trees, or moments of disorientation so intense that they swear something was manipulating their senses. Whether the Kushtaka is seen as a protector, a trickster, or a predator depends entirely on who's telling the story. But one thing is consistent across every version. The Kushtaka is a creature that draws you in by showing you what you want most or what you most fear. And once you follow it, the wilderness may never let you go. If we were to collect every account of the Kushtaka and laid them side by side, you'd find contradictions and variations, but also a striking set of patterns. No matter the storyteller, certain features appear again and again, painting the same disturbing picture of what the creature can do and why it has terrified generations. And what even does this thing look like, and what powers does it have? I mean, I know we said, like, think of like an otter and a man,
Yeah.
but
So we'll start with its appearance, though even that is not very simple. Most descriptions place the Kushtaka somewhere between human and otter, a tall, fur-covered figure with a vague human face, or an otter-like creature that stands upright with unsettling intelligence in its eyes. Some storytellers describe an almost fluid transformation between forms. One moment, fully human, the next, an otter. And sometimes, something caught in the uncanny space between, which freaks me out. I don't want to know what that looks like. There are even accounts of darker, serpentine shapes glimpsed in the forest or along riverbanks. But physical form is only one piece of its arsenal. The Kushtaka's most formidable power, and the one that survivors speak of in whispers, is its ability to mimic sound. Not just any sound, but the ones most likely to pull a person off a safe path. Reports tell of voices calling out from the trees, perfectly replicating a lost friend. Others mention the cries of an infant, or the panic shrieks of a woman in distress. In certain retellings, the creature uses a strange 3-note whistle that carries unnaturally far through the woods, beckoning anyone who hears it toward deeper isolation. Once someone responds to these illusions, and once they step off the trail or move toward a shoreline that wasn't there moments before, the Kushtaka's other abilities come into play. Many stories describe the creature as unbelievably fast, moving with a burst of speed no human could outrun. Witnesses claim it can close long distances in seconds, sometimes accompanied by eerie laughter, wailing, or inhuman shrieks echoing through the trees. And then there's the matter of the soul. In several traditions, the Kushtaka isn't merely hunting for a physical victim. Instead, it seeks to claim something far more precious. To encounter one and succumb to its lure means transformation and a wrenching loss of identity, where the victim is said to rise again as one of the other... I keep wanting to say other people. Once changed, the new Kushtaka becomes part of the same predatory cycle. forever severed from the human world and from the possibility of reincarnation. In this sense, the creature doesn't just end lives, it rewrites them.
Which I kind of like, there's part of me that thinks when we started like diving in and like talking about this, a little bit of like a I don't know why, but a Horcrux.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like changing your soul just into itself.
Right. Also, it kind of reminds me of like the mirror of, what the hell is the mirror in the first one, where it like shows you what it wants, because that whole thing, like,
yep,
little bit, some callbacks here.
Yeah.
Despite its frightening abilities, legends do mention ways to repel or weaken the Kushtaka. Dogs, for example, are said to detect the creature long before humans can, which very much makes sense to me.
It's not a cat, so.
Dogs are very smart. I feel like dogs are like, when it comes to like other animals, he's smart.
Yeah.
He's a smart boy. I feel like Archie would run from one of these things. Archie would run from a chihuahua. However.
Yeah. Archie would run from the trees dropping their leaves.
Yes, this is true. Whatever.
But I'll take it. If he's going to protect me from the Kushtaka, you're here, Arch.
Well, their barking is thought to drive it away. So as long as he just lets out a bark.
He does have a good bark on him.
He does have a good bark on him. For such a little thing, I feel like he's got a nice bark.
Yeah, that Arch, you got a good bark.
Fire is another deterrent, along with copper, a metal that holds spiritual significance in several indigenous traditions. There are even accounts suggesting that something as mundane as human urine can disrupt the creature's approach. And curiously, a few sources claim the Kushtaka must return to water periodically to sustain its strength, hinting at a limitation tied to its aquatic origins. But perhaps the chilling thread woven all through these stories is not just how the Kushtaka haunts, but why its methods work so well. This is a creature that doesn't rely on brute force or obvious danger. Instead, it uses familiarity, desperation, and hope. It appears as the person you most want to find or the person you most fear losing. It calls to you in a voice you trust, and once you take the first step off the path, the wilderness closes behind you like a curtain. It convinces you to walk toward it willingly.
So when you think about it, is this thing good or is it evil? Different clans tell different stories. The benevolent version saves drowning victims, guides lost travelers, and wards off other harmful spirits. The malevolent version lures people with mimicry, steals their souls, kidnaps others to add to its clan, and leads travelers astray until they freeze, drown, or vanish. This dual nature makes the Kushtaka difficult to categorize. It's neither monster nor guardian. It simply is. A piece of the natural world operating by its own rules. Rules not meant for humans. It's kind of like Skinwalker or Wendigo-y kind of vibe.
I'm getting a lot of callbacks to a lot of different like cryptids and things that I feel like we have covered before.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes. Shall we move along to some of the most reported encounters?
Yeah. What's wild is when you start stacking those stories side by side. The old tales collected by anthropologists, the prospectors' reports, the modern hunting stories, the strange events that happen to people who don't believe in any of this. The pattern becomes much harder to ignore. These encounters can't be proven in a courtroom. They can't be plugged neatly into a GPS coordinate and filed away. They move from generation to generation, and in many cases, right into the present day. The first one we have is, we're calling it Devil's Country, the prospector who ran. So at the turn of the 21st century, long before social media and podcasts, Thomas Bay already had a reputation. Prospectors had another name for it, Devil's Country. One of the best known stories from this region came from a young prospector named Charlie. His full name was never used in print, and his accounts were later preserved and published by a miner, Henry Culp. Over a century later, that story is still being told in Southeast Alaska. Though I remembered, Charlie was just 19 when he got a tip from an older Tlingit man in Wrangell. There was gold in Thomas Bay. The elder told him a rich vein up the Patterson River that could make a man's fortune, but that the warning came with it. The land up there was wrong. The spirits in that place were dangerous. Even if you found the gold, you wouldn't be the same. Charlie decided to go anyway. He paddled a canoe. Also, when I say canoe, now I can only think of the Bluey episode when Chili's chasing her dad and Bingo and Bluey, and they get to this dock. They've finally get to this dock, and Bluey's like, "Oh no, she's gonna get us. What are we gonna do?" And Bingo's like, "We canoe." Anytime somebody says it, that's all I can think of now. I have to stop watching Bluey. So he paddled a canoe along the river delta, beneath the cliffs that wall off the sky, and finally into a gray sheet of water that is Thomas Bay. Following the directions he'd been given, he hiked inland, alone, into a landscape that felt like it had been scraped raw by some old catastrophe. Bare rock, twisted timber, silence. Weeks later, he came back. The men in Wrangell barely recognized him. He was filthy, shaken, and clutching a chunk of quartz laced with gold. Now, I mean, why wouldn't he be filthy?
Right.
He was kind of, I'm assuming he couldn't shower. But, so when they pressed him for what had happened, he didn't want to talk. Only when he was about to leave Alaska for good, swearing never to return, did he finally tell his story. He said he found signs of an old disaster the Tlingit spoke of. Slopes stripped bare as if by a massive slide. No birds, no fresh tracks. The whole valley felt abandoned. Then, as he picked his way along a ridge above a small lake, they came. From the far shore, he saw figures climbing toward him. Not quite human, not quite animal. Hair covered, raw skin, moving with a jerky, unnatural gait. No clear gender. No clothing, just matted fur and patches of sores where skin shone through. Their arms stretched out as they climbed, clawed hands reaching for him, and the air filled with a chorus of shrieks, wheezing breaths, and a smell so foul it made him gag. He tried to fire his rifle. It jammed. He swung it instead, then dropped it and ran. He said he could feel them behind him, so close he imagined their hands scraping his back. Hot breath on his neck. He didn't know how he got back to the canoe. He didn't remember pushing off from the shore. He just remembered paddling as if the water beneath him were on fire. The hunk of gold somehow stayed in the boat. The gun did not. Years later, when Culp and other men went back to investigate, some claimed they too saw strange figures watching from the rocks, or heard sounds that didn't belong to any animal that they knew. A few of them, the story goes, never really came back from that trip, at least not in their minds. Others just plainly disappeared. Was Charlie chased by the Kushtaka? By something else? Or by his own fear? No one can say, but Devil's Country has worn that name ever since.
More than 100 years later, Thomas Bay still draws people in. Hikers, hunters, anglers, and the occasional thrill seekers who's heard the old prospector's tale and wants to stand in the same haunted landscape. One such hiker set out along the tree line on an overcast day, following the shoreline where the forest presses right up against the water. He later said the place felt heavy, as if the silence itself had weight. At first, he thought he saw nothing but dark trunks and wide bent branches. Then, he noticed movement. Small, human-shaped figures slipping between the trees. Too short for adults, too upright for animals, moving in little spurts like film with missing frames. He told himself it was shadows, light playing tricks, but as he walked, the shapes seemed to keep pace with him. Then, the voices started. It wasn't one voice, and it wasn't clear words at first, more like a murmur. As he listened, it sharpened into something much worse, a chorus calling his name. Not just once, not from one direction, but from multiple points in the forest at once. High, low, male, female, overlapping, rising, and falling like waves. He froze on the trail, which is about what I feel like I would do.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds about right.
You start hearing things calling your name, or just things in general in the woods, and you can't see them, or you see shadows.
Nope.
I'm probably going to stop.
The forms along the tree line began to stretch, limbs lengthening, torsos wrapping into something thinner and bent. The hiker said it was like watching people pull on ill-fitting animal skins. Their silhouettes widened and their heads changed shape, and suddenly they looked less like humans and more like massive otters, reared up on hind legs, just watching him. That was enough. He turned and ran, scrambling over roots and slick rocks, following the shoreline back toward camp without looking over his shoulder. He didn't stop until he saw the other tents, other people, and the reassuring clutter of coolers and camp chairs. When he finally looked back, the tree line was still. No figures, no voices, nothing but wind in the trees. He packed up and left Thomas Bay the next morning. He has never gone back.
I think it's interesting that, thrill seeker goes up there and you get what you asked for.
Right. That's what happens.
So stories of the Kushtaka aren't just found in old manuscripts or gold rush journals. They live in recollections of people whose jobs are to be rational. People trained to read tracks, understand terrain, and explain what they see. One ranger, working in a remote stretch of the Alaskan backcountry in the 1990s, what a decade, had an experience that she still can't explain. She was following a river alone late in the afternoon. The light was starting to flatten out, that washed gray you get before the dusk in the north, when she heard it. A child crying. At first she had thought the family had gotten separated, or that a kid had slipped near the water. The crying sounded just ahead, so she moved faster, calling out, identifying herself. No answer. Just the same sobbing sounds, slightly muffled, as if coming through trees. She followed it, a quarter mile, a half mile, almost a mile upriver. It took her that long to realize something was very wrong. The crying never got closer, never moved to the left or right, never changed in pitch or volume. It didn't hitch the way a real child's breathing would. It was the same exact sound over and over, like a loop. She stopped. The hairs on her arms stood up. That's when she noticed something else. She was no longer sure how far she was from the trail. She didn't remember stepping off, but the riverbank around her looked unfamiliar, steeper, with thick brush hemming her in. The crying cut off. A few heartbeats of total silence. Then, from the river, a shape. She described it later as a figure of water and shadow, rising just enough that she could see its outline against the current. It wasn't entirely human, but it wasn't an animal either. Its edges seemed to shimmer and wrap as if it couldn't quite hold itself together. She doesn't remember what happened after that. Her next clear memory is standing back on the marked trail late in the day, facing the opposite direction. No crying, no figure, no obvious sign of how she had gotten there. She checked her watch and realized more time had passed than she could account for. She didn't file an official incident report. It would only raise questions she couldn't answer. But she did tell a few trusted locals. Their response was simple. You followed the wrong sound. You're lucky you came back. That, I am almost getting the feeling, too, with some of these stories. What if it's the whole play on, like, the good and evil? Mm-hmm. So, like, what if in the midst of the Kushtaka tribe or clan, whatever we would want to call them, what if there are good and evil ones?
Yeah.
What if there are ones that'll lure you to change you?
Right.
And then there are ones that are like, no, we're going to, save them and bring them back away from the evil ones.
True.
Interesting.
Well, not all encounters involve seeing the Kushtaka directly. In many stories, people describe a sudden, overwhelming shift in perception, as if something steps in between them and reality. One seasoned hunter, born and raised in southeast Alaska, was tracking deer through misty timber when he felt a strange heaviness settle over him. He remembered watching a deer move through the fog, perfectly framed between the trees. Then, for reasons he couldn't explain, he sat down at the base of a trunk instead of taking the shot. The next thing he knew, he was walking, headed deeper into the forest, rifle in hand, disoriented and groggy, with no memory of getting up. His backpack, full of gear and survival supplies, was gone. He eventually made his way back, but he could never account for the missing time or the missing pack. To some, it's fatigue. To others, it may be a minor medical episode. To many locals, especially those who have heard the old Tlingit stories, it sounds like something else. A mind briefly brushed by the Kushtaka.
I feel like, too, you hear a ton of time slip stories from Alaska, like out in the wilderness.
Yeah.
People just go missing, and they end up like 50 miles away, no idea how they got there, and all that stuff.
How they got there.
Sorry. Sometimes my random accents come out. Anyway, there was another hunter, a respected Tlingit elder, who told a story that echoes of one of the oldest themes in the Kushtaka lore, the danger of trusting what you think you see. He shot a deer and was preparing to dress it when he looked up and saw two familiar figures at the forest's edge, his father and his brother-in-law, waiting for him. They turned and stepped into the trees. He called out, telling them to hold up, and they kept walking. He followed, moving more quickly now, watching their backs as they disappeared and reappeared in between trunks. The trail under his feet felt solid, well worn, and he ran along it, calling to them again and again. And we all know how this is.
Yeah.
Someone you know or whatever, they get up and they start walking away, and now you gotta finish what you're doing real quick, and you don't even think about it. You just start trying to like hustle to catch up to them. Then suddenly he stopped. The trail had vanished. He was standing in the middle of a thick stand of devil's club thorny plants that tear the clothing and skin. Bleeding, off balance, heart pounding, there was no sign of his relatives. No beaten path, just brambles and silence. Later he said he'd believed he'd been chasing an illusion, a projection crafted by the Kushtaka using the faces of people he loved most. If he hadn't snapped out of it when he did, he wasn't sure where he would have ended up. So, I wonder too, I bet you if he would have went back, the deer was missing. Because part of me is like, what if they, lured him away to do who knows what.
Yeah.
And he was able to snap out of it,
right.
But they also led him away to get the deer.
True. All of these things could be true.
Mm-hmm. Now
I'm going to move into the campsite. Encounters don't always happen in the middle of some remote, untouched wilderness. Sometimes they slip into places we go to relax and escape everyday life. On Douglas Island, not far from Juneau, there's a stretch of wild coastline that one writer and his family used repeatedly as a kind of refuge. He'd hike the island when he needed to clear his head. Over the years, he began to notice that the place seemed almost aware of him. He once came across the wreckage of an old plane in the forest there. Metal scattered through the trees, a float jammed upright, pieces embedded in trunks. For a moment, he feared it belonged to friends who'd vanished years earlier in a float plane accident. But the discovery tied the island in his mind to loss and unanswered questions. Later, on a camping trip at that exact spot with his partner and their dog, things escalated. As evening fell, his partner grew increasingly uneasy. The dog began to growl at the tree line, its hackles rising as it stared into the darkness, as if something were moving just beyond the circle of firelight. They heard rocks trembling nearby, which made no sense on flat ground, and both felt that unnerving sensation of being watched. He circled the camp with a headlamp. Nothing. They both tried to sleep. More than once, his partner shook him awake, insisting that something or someone was moving outside the tent. Each time he checked, he found only empty forests and the sound of waves. Frustration won out, and he told her not to wake him again unless it was a bear. Hours later, he woke up on his own. Something was pressing against his feet from outside the tent, pushing the fabric down hard enough to pin his legs. Assuming it was the dog, he kicked. The pressure didn't move. When he reached around in the dark, he realized the dog was asleep between them. Whatever was at his feet was outside. He kicked again, harder this time. The weight lifted, and he heard it move away through the bush. Not on four legs, but with the rhythm of a biped, crashing off into the night. When he finally got the courage to unzip the tent and look, the clearing was empty. Was it a bear behaving strangely? A human intruder? Imagination? He doesn't know. But in a region where stories of the Kushtaka are woven into everyday conversation, the experience fits uncontrollably well into an existing pattern. A presence in the woods, sounds that don't add up, and the sense that something is testing the edges of your fear.
So, long before prospectors and modern hikers began sharing these stories, Tlingit and Tahltan stories had already described eerily similar events. Archaeologists in the early 1900s recorded tales of people lured by voices of relatives who have long since died, invited into what looked like canoes and houses, only to discover later that the canoe was a piece of driftwood or the house was a hollow beneath a tree. In one famous story, a man named Kaka is separated from his companions and approached by what appear to be his mother and sister. Only by glimpsing their true forms, land-otter people riding on the bits of wood, does he realize something is wrong. Other tales speak of family members who drowned and later returned as providers, bringing halibut and octopus to starving relatives, but are unable to stay with them when daybreak and raven calls approach. Children give tales like playful otter pups, only to have those tails cut off or slapped away before they could even fully change. Hunters who black out in the wilderness, only to be found later wandering naked on a log in the water, minds fractured by something that they can't describe. Again and again, certain themes repeat. Familiar faces in unfamiliar places, homes that turn out not to be homes, boats that dissolve in the driftwood, voices that pull you from the path, a return to the human world, but never entirely the same. Then the names change, the dates change, the exact details shift from village to village. But the core of the encounter, the pattern, remains. Skeptics will say that these are just stories, hallucinations, misidentifications, grief given shape. In some cases, maybe they're right. The human mind is fragile, especially in places where isolation, weather, and fear press from all sides. But if all of this is just an imagination, it's a remarkably consistent one. From Devil's Country and Thomas Bay to Douglas Island, to the inland forests of British Columbia and the Yukon, people keep meeting something that wears the shape of what they love or what they fear, and it leads them off the safe path. Whether we call it a Kushtaka, land-otter man, or simply the thing in the woods, the encounters, old and new, suggest one chilling possibility. Whatever this presence is, real, spiritual, psychological, or something in between, it has been with the people of the North for a very, very long time. And it isn't done yet. It's almost like in Derry. I don't want to spoil it for people because I know some people may still be watching it. But it's like the way it kind of is. It's been there for a very long time.
Yeah. Before we close out tonight's episode, we want to acknowledge the sources and storytellers whose work helps preserve these traditions for future generations. Some of the earliest written accounts of the Kushtaka stories were recorded in the early 1900s by anthropologists such as John Reed Swanton, whose Tlingit myths and texts collected oral traditions shared by Tlingit knowledge keepers of the time. Other stories were documented by James Tiet, who worked with the Tahltan, included detailed accounts of encounters and transformations associated with the land-otter people. Modern perspectives also come from Alaskans who grew up with these stories and continue to explore them today. Writers like Bjorn Deal, for example, have shared both historical research and first-hand experiences from Southeast Alaska's remote landscapes, bringing contemporary voices into the discussion. And of course, none of these written works would exist without the Indigenous storytellers who keep these narratives alive long before they were ever put to paper. If you're interested in learning more, these collections and first-hand accounts offer a deeper look at the cultural, historical, and spiritual context surrounding the Kushtaka and other beings of the Inside Passage. But as always, the most important voices belong to the communities from whom these stories originate. Never Whistle at Night is another recommendation. It's an anthology of Indigenous horror short stories, of which Kushtaka is the very first in the collection.
I actually kind of want to get that book.
No, seriously.
I'm like all about it. Now, every culture has shapeshifters, changelings, tricksters, and spirit mimics. However, the Kushtaka is unique because it embodies the landscape itself. Cold, beautiful, dangerous, and unpredictable. To the Tlingit and the Tsimshian, the Kushtaka is a symbol of both danger and transformation. And the idea of the wilderness can swallow you, not just physically, but spiritually, resonates even now. So what is the Kushtaka? As with all great legends, the truth lies somewhere between fear and belief. But if you ever find yourself walking the Alaskan coast, and you ever hear something calling your name, especially you know someone who possibly couldn't be there, do not answer. Do not look for them. And whatever you do not follow that sound. Until next time, stay warm, stay grounded, and stay on the trail. See ya.
See ya.